Okay, yeah, so the recording's just starting. I'll wait until that's started. Perfect. So once the session's over, I'll put this on OneDrive and send you a link to it, and then you can download it from there if that works for you.
Perfect.
All right, Jack, I've made you a presenter now, so you can take it away whenever you're ready.
That's great, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so we'll start off briefly with our standalone products. And these are sort of the flagship Macrium Reflect products. And then you'll notice later on that when we look at Site Manager, that's mainly integrating these into a central management platform so that you can control backups from one central location. The most important part to understanding Macrium Reflect, though, I'd say, is getting to grips with these standalone products and the type of operations that they offer. So what you'll see here is that I'm using the technician's license. That's one of the standalone products that we offer. The other options are the workstation and server. Those are the kind of enterprise standalone offerings. The workstation edition's installed on client operating systems, and the server edition's installed on server operating systems. We have the home edition for home use, and we also have Server Plus that enables the backup of SQL and Exchange, and also the deployment and technicians kit. These come with the option of a portable application that can be run on computers without installing the full edition of Reflect. And I'll touch on the benefits of those a little bit more when we get to that. So to start with, the main operations that you'll be performing with standalone Reflect is imaging, cloning, and file and folder backups. Those are the various options for kind of backing up your data. So a disk image works at a block level and it backs up whole partitions and disks. File and folder backup is exactly that. It just backs up particular files and folders at a file level. And disk cloning will take partitions that you've specified and copy them one-to-one, uncompressed onto another disk. And with each of those, you get kind of particular use cases as well. So the most common operation that we'll see performed is a disk image, since it's extremely quick and it's a great way to back up a lot of data in one go. So to perform a disk image, it's a matter of selecting the disk, or if you want to back up multiple disks, there is the option here as well. Selecting the partitions that you want to back up. If we're backing up an operating system like we are in this instance, it's important to ensure that all the partitions with these Windows icons are included in them. Specifying a destination. You can also specify alternate locations. So for example, in this case, I'm backing up to the E drive. If the E drive was unavailable, then the next option in the list would be tried, and so on until it reaches a destination it can write to. And the main benefits of doing that is either you can have a failover destination for your backups, or in some cases, we see people set up drive rotation where they have 6 USB drives and then they can just rotate it around each day and it will back up to whichever one is accessible at that point in time. We also have a set of advanced options that can be configured at any point during the image creation. These advanced options as well will carry over to the other types of operations, as you'll see in a minute. There are a couple of unique ones for each operation though. So as you'll see here, we have kind of the advanced options that you'd expect: compression to create smaller backups. We have encryption to password protect your backups, auto verification, which just ensures the integrity of the backups once it's been completed, the ability to add a comment, and also set in power saving options once the backup's completed. We also have the ability to send email notifications once a backup's completed, along with subject and contents for that as well. And that is configured in the advanced settings up here. On the second page, we have the schedules and retention rules. a schedule will just control when the backup's performed, essentially. So that instead of having to manually go and start the backup each time, when the schedule time is reached, that backup will trigger automatically. And to do this, we have a set of pre-defined templates. These are great for users that maybe don't necessarily know how often they want to perform backups and just want a quick template, or they're not too familiar with backup software, in which case these are industry standard templates, we say, since they are very common across backup software. However, if none of those fit the environment, they can also create their own custom schedule as well. So this example, I'll just go with the grandfather, father, son. And this is a mix of full backups, differential backups, and incremental backups. The difference there being a full backup will back up everything on the partitions that we specified. A differential will include all the changes that have occurred since the last full backup, and an incremental backup will only back up the changes that have occurred since the last backup of any type. So the advantage here being that incremental backups are smaller and faster to create. However, if you want to restore one, you do need all the previous backups in the set present as well. And differentials are going to be smaller than full backups, but larger than incrementals. The main advantage here being that they're always only appended to the full backup. So I could create 6 differential backups, delete 5 of them, and still be able to restore the 6th differential backup. And we have the retention rules down here. These just control how many backups are stored in the destination at one time. So obviously, if we are creating automatic backups, that destination is going to start getting full eventually. This means we don't have to go in and manually purge backups. They will be purged automatically for us. So if I set this to keep, say, 1 full backup, when a second full backup is created, the first full backup will be deleted until the retention rules are satisfied. And the end result being that in this target folder, there will only ever be 1 full backup at any one point in time. And we have a couple of additional options down here as well. We can purge the oldest backup set if less than a certain amount of space is available. The main benefit for this being that, if it's more important for new sets to be created than retaining old sets, if the space drops below a certain threshold, the oldest backup sets in the destination set will be purged to make space for the newest one. And we have the option to run the retention rules before the backup as well. And then on the final page, we have a bit of a summary of the backup that we're about to create. I'm just going to go back and uncheck the C drive. We don't recommend doing this if you are backing up your operating system. You obviously want all of the operating system partitions involved, but to save some time, I'm just going to reduce that to a few system partitions. And then we have the option to save this as a backup definition file, which I'll touch on a bit more in a second, and the option to run this backup now or not. So we'll save it as a definition and run the backup. This will open Reflect Monitor, and you'll see this with the logs as well. This just gives us an overview of what's happening during the backup. So if for whatever reason that backup had failed, we get an error message here, but we can go back over and look at the operations it's performed. So since we saved it as a backup definition file, the options and settings that we specified are now shown in the definitions files tab. The main benefit of this being that it makes it extremely easy to then go in and run the exact same backup again. We don't have to go through all those steps of reconfiguring the backup. So as you can see, this has performed the exact same backup. It's got those 3 partitions and also the settings that I specified before. And at any point in time, we can edit that definition file to change the partitions that are included or the options that we've specified. Along with that, we also have a couple of additional options that I'll touch on in a moment. So back to the local disks, which is sort of the main tab of Reflect. This is where you'll be performing the different operations. If we have a quick look at cloning a disk, so as I mentioned, this reads from the disk in the same way. It's reading block at a block level, and it's copying partitions across to the destination. The main difference being when that backup that we just created completed, it's created an MRIMG file. That's our proprietary file format. And that's created a backup in there that we can then restore at a later point in time. The difference with a clone is that they won't be copied. It won't create an image file on the destination. It will copy the whole partitions uncompressed onto the destination. So I won't perform this since it is a destructive operation. It will delete partitions on the destination to do this. But if I select copy there, this is what the destination disk would look like once that clone's completed. As you can see, each partition has been copied across and all of the data in those partitions as well. And the other operation that we'll touch on quickly is a file and folder backup. So the main advantage of disk images are that they can back up whole partitions extremely quickly. In some instances, though, you might not want to copy a whole partition. You know, I give you example of an accounting firm. They might have a lot of important spreadsheets. You don't want to back up, say, a terabyte of data just to copy these 4 spreadsheets, in which case you can use a file and folder backup, go in and select in particular files and folders. So I could back up my desktop here, select destination. There's also include and exclude rules so that you can narrow down what files are included from the folders that you've specified. We have the same options here for the schedule and retention rules. And then at the end, you'll see the same summary as well. And the main advantage of this is that if you are copying individual files and folders that maybe change a lot, this can often be quicker than backing up the whole partitions. So those are the main backup operations. I'll briefly touch on restoring as well. So while we're discussing individual files and folders, as you saw there, you can back up individual files and folders, but if you've created a disk image, you don't necessarily have to restore the whole partition. So for example, if I go into the existing backups tab, which is where backups are managed, you can get a breakdown, a sort of graphical breakdown of the what's included in the backup. So we could either restore the whole backup by using the restore button here. Alternatively, we can use the browse button, and this would let us mount one of the partitions. So if we use these options here, this will now be mounted as a virtual drive in Windows. It's empty since it is just a system partition, but I could go in and select particular files and folders that were included in the backup and copy those out of the image. And the main advantage there being, again, suppose I have imaged a partition with those important spreadsheets on it, I could just mount the backup and take those spreadsheets out of it instead of having to restore the whole volume. When it comes to restoring the backup, backups can either be restored from within Windows. However, if you are restoring a system partition, it does require those partitions to be unmounted, since essentially you're trying to restore Windows while you're still booted into it. And I'll show you what that looks like now. However, suppose I was restoring, say, a data partition from within Windows, I could just restore that normally using the Reflect UI. If I'm attempting to restore a system partition, I'll receive this message, which essentially says, you know, you're booted into Windows, we can't dismount the drives, perform it from within the rescue media. I could either automatically build that now, and it will boot into the rescue media and perform the restore. Alternatively, I can go into the other tasks menu here and create rescue media manually. And this is one of the first things that we recommend doing after installing Macrium Reflect. The rescue media is a bootable environment that allows you to restore images in the event that you're unable to access the main Reflect application. So, for example, if my Windows OS suddenly stopped booting, I wouldn't be able to boot into Windows to restore an image. So that's where I'd attach my rescue media, use it to boot the computer, and then perform the restore that way. The other example is if I want to restore an image to a bare metal machine that hasn't got an operating system on it, I'd use the USB drive to boot and perform the restore that way. Since I'm using a virtual machine, there's no USB option here. But if I had connected a USB drive to the computer, you'd see that show up here. We also support creating ISO files, a Windows boot menu option, which is stored on a local drive and adds an option to the boot menu. Or you could create a USB drive as well, and CD and DVD as well. So to build this, you select the option that you want. You can see in the advanced options here, we have a few different options. The rescue environment is based on either Windows RE or Windows PE. So that's the Windows recovery environment or the Windows pre-installation environment. We download Windows PE directly from Microsoft and use the necessary components to build the rescue media. Windows RE comes pre-installed as part of modern operating systems, so selecting this option would not require any further downloads. We have some additional options here. You can change the architecture of your rescue media. There's additional options for adding BitLocker support. So if I'm backing up and restoring BitLocker volumes, we'd recommend doing that as well. In the devices and drivers, since it's a virtual machine, this is empty. But this would give a breakdown of the hardware that's connected to my system. So if I have a RAID card in here, that will show up here. And the status will tell me whether it's included in the rescue media or not, whether I need to take any action to get that supported. And that's just to ensure that these hardware devices function correctly while I'm booted in the rescue media. Suppose I'm storing my images on a network location, I'd need to make sure that I have a driver for my network card here to make sure I can access those backups. Once we're happy with the options, we can create the rescue media, and then in the event of disaster, we can use that to boot the computer. So while that's creating, I'll touch briefly on this additional option down here, which is create portable technicians rescue media. And this comes back to those versions of Reflect that I mentioned before. So the technicians and deployment kit comes with an option to create technicians rescue media. And the main advantage of that is that you create this rescue media, it can still be used to boot a computer as necessary. But it also contains a Reflect portable application, which can be launched within Windows without installing Reflect. So the main sort of examples I give there are, say, the technician's license. One example could be a technician who runs a computer repair shop. If a customer brings in a computer and he's going to be working on it, you don't want to be installing software on that computer since it doesn't belong to the technician, but you also want to have a backup of it in the event that anything happens to the operating system. They could connect this portable application, run Reflect and create an image without installing any software on that. And the deployment kit contains the same option, but that's slightly more focused on deploying an image out to a number of computers instead of backing up and restoring to the same computer.
Would that also include servers as well?
Sorry, what was that?
When you were saying then about I think it was the site license for the deployment, we were saying to mass computers, is it also possible to do it to servers as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So the deployment and technician's license, essentially, you install them, you get a Macrium Flex Server Edition installer. You install that on a computer on the network. It doesn't have to be the computer you want to image. I normally give the example of installing it, on a technician's laptop. You can then create these portable applications, and those can be used on server edition or client operating systems as well. So once this is created, we'll look briefly at the rescue media as well. I'll also touch on a couple of the advanced options that I can show you in a bit more detail. The advanced options, we can sort of break it down into ViBoot, Macrium Image Guardian, and Change Block Tracker. So the first one I'll show you will be Image Guardian. What Macrium Image Guardian does essentially is it installs a filter driver, and what that does is deny any kind of write access to Macrium image files, Macrium backup files, so it protect file and folder backups, SQL backups as well. And then any third-party attempts to modify a Macrium Reflect backup will be blocked. And the main use case for this is preventing, unauthorized access, say by ransomware that might try to encrypt backup files, and accidental deletion as well. So in the event that this system became infected with ransomware, it'd start encrypting files. When it attempts to encrypt the image file, they'd get a toast notification that pops up and says blocked an unauthorized operation. So I can show you that now. The Image Guardian is controlled through the UI with the Image Guardian settings here. So I can turn it on and also select the volumes that I want it to run on. So since I'm only using the E drive as a destination, it's only enabled on the E drive. If I then went into File Explorer and attempted to delete one of these backups, let's delete this one. I get a notification saying we've blocked unauthorized access. And that's because I've attempted to delete it using File Explorer instead of deleting it through the Reflect UI. And you get the same notification if ransomware tried to encrypt one of these files, for example. The next feature is Change Block Tracker. There's not too much to show with Change Block Tracker. It more runs in the background. Change Block Tracker runs in a similar way, though, where it installs a filter driver, and it essentially keeps a log of all the changes that are happening to a volume. It's indicated by this icon of a running man. So if this was running on my C drive, I'd create a backup, say a full backup, Change Block Tracker would activate, and it'd start keeping note of any changes that are happening to the volume. When I then perform an incremental backup, it will go and immediately back up those changes without having to search for them. So all that does essentially is speed up incremental backups by reducing the amount of time it takes to find those changes. The next advanced feature is Macrium Viboot. And how Macrium Viboot works is you select an image file. So I'll show you in here. So I don't think I have an image installed. I will show you on sorry about that. We'll circle back to Viboot in a second. I'll just start creating an image in the background. I accidentally deleted one of the images before. Okay, so again, this is the image wizard that you saw before. I select the partitions and then we'll just click through and run this. So once this image is being created, I'll show you Viboot. As a kind of quick overview, how Viboot works is you select an image file and then use Viboot. It will boot that image up as a virtual machine instantly. So the main use case there is for kind of, if you wanted to update an image file, we say you can boot it as a virtual machine, make some changes, and then create a new image. Or instant failover as well. And we've used that ourselves at Macrium, where a business critical server's gone down. We select an image of it, Viboot it, and we have a virtual machine to instantly take the place of the system that's broken. And then that can just run continuously while the system is repaired. So while that image creates, I'll move on to the next part, which is Site Manager, and we'll come back to Viboot in a moment. So Macrium Site Manager essentially is central management for your backups. If we think of Reflect backing up individual endpoints, we then add those to Site Manager, and we can manage those backups from one central location. Remember the password. So site managers installed on a machine somewhere on the network. And then what we can do is start adding computers to be managed centrally using this computer. One of the great things about Site Manager as well is that it allows you to start centrally managing the licensing for computers as well. So suppose I had 20 endpoints that I want to back up. You can install Reflect on each one of those endpoints and license them all individually. Alternatively, we can add those endpoints to Site Manager and begin managing them using the Site Manager UI. And what we can do is add license keys directly to the Site Manager user interface, and that will handle the licensing for those endpoints automatically. So just as an example, I have here what's known as a Macrium agent license, and this contains a number of seats. So we could add this to the Site Manager user interface. It has 5 seats. So I could add up to 5 computers to Site Manager, and each one will pull one of these licenses down to use. So as you can see, that computer that you just saw has now become licensed and connected. That backup, which I started running manually on Reflect as well, you can see in the UI here that it's detected that a backup operation is being performed. So it keeps track of anything that's happening on standalone Reflects as well, if those are managed using Site Manager. So the first step to using Site Manager is to add the computers. As you can see, I've already added one here. There are several ways that you can add a computer to Site Manager. It has Active Directory integration using LDAP. So we could search the Active Directory domain and start pulling computers out of that. If network discovery is enabled on a computer, we can enable this and they will start connecting to Site Manager. Or the most common one that we tend to see is manually specifying computers. So you could enter, however many computers here, IP address, DNS, NetBIOS, and then as long as Site Manager is able to communicate with those computers, they will be added here. Once a computer's been added, you can then use install agent. And this installs the Macrium agent or the Site Manager agent onto those endpoints. And that's what's used to start backing up those computers.
With
The
that,
Site Manager.
sorry to interrupt. When you are obviously adding machines to Site Manager, is there a maximum number of machines that you can add at one time?
No, I don't believe there's any limit on that. The main sort of limiting factor that we've seen in some cases is by the amount of computers that an organization has. We have test environments where we've added upwards of 200, 300 computers, and there's no issues using those with Site Manager.
So Site Manager, is that running off, say, a SQL database in the background, or is that just purely using your solution?
So this is purely our solution. I don't believe there's any kind of SQL databases running on the back end. We have internal kind of databases that Site Manager compiles and manages. So I'll show you those briefly now. We go to Macrium. All of the Site Manager files you'll be able to see in here. So there's a lot of logging involved. And then we have things like repository info.db. So as you'll see in a minute, a repository is just a storage area that's predefined to store backups. The repository info.db is just going to keep track of those repositories and information about them. And then these files are used by Site Manager to manage the actual environment. And you'll see these kind of databases pop up in a few different locations as well. So once those computers have been added, the next steps is somewhat similar to you saw with standalone reflect. So we have the definition again, which might ring bells from the definition file before. So if I do test2, and we can create a disk image or a file and folder backup again. And we can then, on the next tab, select computers manually using this checkbox, or we can do it by tag as well. And essentially, the tags in Site Manager are just a way to simplify managing large number of backups. So there's predefined tags down here that you can see. So we have, you know, we have the computer 64-bit or 32-bit. We have the operating system version. Since I only have one Windows 10 computer connected, selecting that will search and show me those computers. And we have licensing information as well. However, we can also manually create user tags as well. So I could create one called Office, and then I could add a tag, say, for Manchester. And then I could select computers. So this computer is actually installed in our Manchester office. I could select that and add it here. Then I could add another tag for London and select all of the computers that are in London. And then if we go back to the computers page here, you'll be able to see our user created tag here. So if I select Manchester, it will show me only the computers with that tag. And the main sorry,
so with Site Manager as well, then rather than using Macrium Reflect itself, as an administrator, let's say, can I actually take one of the images that is stored, say, on a network share and fire it up in the virtual machine while, say, another user is on that image? Or is it only one person at one time that could, say, be on a machine and edit the image?
So I believe with the Viboot, once that is Vibooted, it will be locked down to the kind of one Viboot session. How it works essentially is instead of kind of loading that information into a virtual machine, a couple of different VHDs are created. One of those is a difference in disk, so any changes made to the virtual machine are written to the difference in disk. And we have another one that contains a sort of blank. It's basically a blank VHD, but it contains a bit of a description of the different disks that are included in the image that are then used by the virtual machine. And then the data for the virtual machine is read directly from the image file. So that's why it's able to boot up so quickly. We're not reading everything from the virtual machine, from the image, and then dumping it into a VHD. We're reading data directly from the image file. I can quickly show you Viboot in a little bit more detail now that that image is being created.
Because what I would typically do is I used to be a partner with a company called Venbu. I was
Yeah.
an MSP at the time, and customers back up their data to one of my data sites.
Yeah.
And what a typical recovery environment would be, so for example, say a school, they would have their admin systems fire up, say, in one virtual machine,
Yeah.
and at the same time they would then set up another virtual machine, and they would then start recovering, say, the data shares that everyone would have access to. So that way it's running in the background.
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of that, your best bet would probably be to have one virtual machine, one image file running the virtual machine from. So I could select this image, Viboot from this, and then you could either copy that image file to another location and use that to recover. In which case, then you've got this image which is being used for Viboot whilst you're restoring another image, which is just a copy of this one. And that kind of brings us back as well to you'll see in a second with Site Manager at least the remote synchronization. We always recommend having more than one copy of your backups anyway, since, you know, suppose I'm storing all my backups on a NAS and then that NAS breaks all of a sudden. having another location with those images will ensure that I'm still able to recover as well. So for Viboot to run, you need a hypervisor installed. Currently, we support Microsoft Hyper-V and Oracle VirtualBox. I'd recommend Hyper-V where possible, but in cases where Hyper-V can't be used, VirtualBox can be used instead.
Would you be looking at adding VMware at a stage? Because I do have a big contract with VMware and a couple of customers. Or is it just keep sticking to what you currently offer?
I'm afraid I'm not too sure on that one. I'd have to ask one of the developers about the roadmap. After this call, I can send off an email and see if I can get any more info about that for you.
Perfect.
So, as you saw on the existing backups tab, we have the different images that I've created. It can be done using the Macrium Reflect UI, or we can use the Viboot standalone application. What was that? Which you can see is installed as well. To use Viboot, it does install this standalone application, which can be used to Viboot the images. But using the UI, it's as simple as selecting the image that you want to Viboot, selecting the Viboot icon. That will open the Viboot UI. We're specifying settings for the virtual machine, so the amount of startup RAM and processors. We can also specify network connectivity for that virtual machine. And then if I select finish, that will start creating the virtual machine for us. This might be a little on the slow side since I'm using nested virtualization. But once that's created, you'll see that the virtual machine will boot at the point in time of the image we created. And since we created that image just a second ago, you'll see that the virtual machine is essentially of the current machine. So in this example, you can almost think of it as like, suppose I have a web server that's gone down. I could ensure this has network connectivity, boot it up as a virtual machine, and then this could take the place of the actual web server while we're running maintenance on that. In an ideal world as well, you'd be assigning it more than 1 gig of memory and 1 CPU core. But since it is nested virtualization, I'm running with fewer resources.
Well, what I'll do is I'll ask you a couple of questions whilst that just boots up in the meantime then. So
Yeah, definitely.
with a couple of the other vendors, obviously you get support, but they offer different levels of support depending on the type of package you've got. What is
Yes.
support like with yourself? Is it what you pay is what you get, or depending on obviously the package, how does support work and what levels do you offer?
I think Sabrina will be able to provide more information regarding that. I believe the 2 levels though were standard support and premium support.
Yeah. So it does depend on kind of how much you pay. So you can pay a little bit extra to get that premium support. Premium support is 24/7. You're able to call us, access, our online help desk, ticketing support. So it's quite similar to the regular support, aside from the fact that it is 24/7 around the clock, and you are able to call us whenever you like, really.
What remote support solution do you use if you actually need to connect to a customer's site?
We use Zoho Assist for the remote support.
Okay, that's good. The other 2 questions are: do you offer 2 previous builds before the latest? If you're on version 10, would you be able to give me version 8? Because some schools, obviously in the UK, have to run 2 builds prior to the latest. My local council being one of them. Is that something that could be offered?
Yeah, so I can't imagine there's an issue with that. I imagine since essentially you can break Reflect down into versions. So the most recent ones are version 6, 7, and 8. We're currently on version 8. However, if you look up here, we have version 8.0.6979. So I'm running a few builds behind at the moment anyway. Would it be one of these more numbered builds that you'd be looking for instead of version 6?
No, it would be version 6.
I'm afraid I'm not too sure on that one. We can offer, earlier builds of, say, version 8. So if you version 8.1 will be coming out in the relatively near future. If you did want an installer for a previous build of version 8, we would be able to give you that.
Okay. That is a big thing for me. I work with 6 Academic Trust, and that is a big thing for them to be 2 previous builds. When I've worked with them on other contracts, I've made them aware, obviously, that it's not really advised and that in previous builds there's bugs, etc.
Yeah.
Because it's governed by, obviously, the council and the awarding body, there's no way around it. I have took it to the council, and that could take anywhere up to 12, 14 weeks just for it to be reviewed, and then it's got to be assessed and looked at again.
Yeah.
So what I would be looking to do is first of all to find an answer out to that if possible, and then if not, what I would do is I would go back to the skills and say, look, actually we can't go 2 full builds behind, but actually what we can do is we can go, say, 2 builds behind on the latest version, like you just discussed then, because I know that is a bit of a deal breaker as such, which is a bit annoying at times because it does lose the deal. But that is possibly the biggest challenge that I actually do face at the moment with my clients.
Yeah, so definitely, like you mentioned as well, if we look in the release notes here, so we got version 8.6979 now. We could go back to say like version 8.5946. We could definitely give installers for those. I'm not sure, Sabrina, if we still sell version 6, as I believe that's now classed as a more end of life product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure either. I'm not sure that we do, to be honest, on the website.
I'll just try and push it then for version 8.1 and see what they say. Because I've got a couple of skills that are coming within the next 2 months. So I'm already feeding them little bits of information. I want to try to get that in as soon as possible so that there's no issues later down the line where they say, is it possible to get a build? And then it's obviously getting a bit too close to time. So what I would usually do is give them as much information beforehand, and then to buy a bit of time, what I'd do is I'd give them a 30-day trial. So then obviously they can get familiar to the solution, make sure it's the right, and obviously they can test it in their environment. And then once they've done that, it'd be a case of working with them to get the right price, obviously, the right products to meet the need. And then the final thing is reporting. What type of reports do you offer? Because some of the businesses that I work with do reporting and they take it to the management team.
Yeah, can you expand on what type of reporting you're thinking of?
So within other vendors that we work with, there are many options to do reporting. You could do a PDF report or an Excel report, for example. But let's just do a PDF report. We can select what backups have been taken, how much data has been backed up, where the data has been allocated, say on the network share, how much space is free, what machines have been backed up, what backups have been succeeded, what backups have failed.
Okay,
that would basically go to the management team saying, look, this solution's working. There's the report.
Yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned, the reporting is a bit more in depth in Site Manager, so I'll quickly run through that in a second. On the standalone Reflect, as you see here, a log is created for every backup that's run, basically, and I can show you these logs. You can email these out as well. I believe they're HTML logs, So they're viewable in any browser. If I quickly show you one of these. So this is that full image that I created a moment ago for Viboot. And you can sort of see the type of information that's included in this. So it's the amount of data that's being backed up, when the backup kicked off, partitions are included, and the destination as well. So this will tell you exactly where on the network or on the local machine of the computer that the image is being saved. It also tells you, the size of the image that was completed. So there's quite a lot of information in here. And as I briefly touched on before as well, if we look in the advanced options, we have the email settings here, so you can configure your SMTP settings in here, and then any backup that fails, let's say I could do send email notification, enter a bit of a message, and include the log as well. So suppose a backup failed on one of my computers, I'd receive an email saying this computer's backup's failed, and I'd have a HTML attachment of that log as well.
With Insight Manager, would you be able to control updates by any chance?
Defer updates, was that?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So if we have a quick look here in Site Manager, when a new update is available, it'll come up as check for updates. There's no automatic update, in Site Manager. You'll be notified when a version's available, and then it's kind of manual. Because we've bearing in mind a lot of companies do like to stay a couple of small releases behind as well, since there's the whole thing of you never know how stable an update's going to be for any software. So we do have some enterprise users, for example, that would stay around 689, 6898 down here. And quickly show you the reporting in Site Manager as well. The logging is the same, so it's HTML logs. They're saved by the agents. Those are viewable here. We can download them. That's HTML here. We can print them out. And if we look in the settings, the Site Manager login's a bit more in-depth, since it is more customizable. So if we go into the notifications tab here, we have the same SMTP options here. You specify your SMTP server that's used to send out those notification emails. And then in notifications, we can select the type of notifications we want to receive. So for backup fails, we can receive a notification for that, etc. And along with that as well, in the email tab, we have the notification email here, the backup summary. So what I can do is enable this, and then daily at a time that I specify, this will give me an overview of the entire Site Manager. So every and all backup that's happened will be included in this summary, and then you can just sort of have a rundown and get an overview of what's happening in that Site Manager. And we can select, what's included in here as well. So if I uncheck these, I could click, when it started, the definition that ran it, and where it's saved to. And the main advantage of that is obviously if we're managing 20 odd computers, it's helpful just to have one attachment that's got everything you need in it. So just to very quickly go back to the Viboot that's finished booting. As you can see here, the image that we created, if I have a look at the desktop, has now booted as a virtual machine. So this would be able to take the place of this physical computer. And as I mentioned with updating the image as well, suppose I've created an image for my computer and I, want to deploy it out somewhere. I could create a document on that machine, go back into the Site Manager UI, select that virtual machine, turn it off first, and then select backup, and that will create a new backup of the virtual machine, including any changes that I've made whilst using that virtual machine.
I must admit, I do like the simplicity of how a virtual machine is created, and obviously, I know the speed is different. Obviously, in your lab, But I know
Yeah.
in the real environment it would be a lot faster because obviously you can specify the requirements. I do like that speed and the use of it because I know with a competitor, um, the way their virtual machines are created is it creates it and then it boots. But the problem is once it's booted and say you're logged in, it then has to finalize. So even though you're
Yeah.
logged in, it then has to automatically reboot twice. And obviously that's downtime.
Yeah, not ideal.
So it's not really ideal. And that is another reason why we're looking to move away. And I think what you've shown me here is everything that I would usually look at and request. Obviously, you've answered the questions that I need. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take this recording, show it to a couple of people. I'm finishing work on the 21st, Sabrina, for about 2 weeks. So we'll keep you
Okay.
updated on what's going on because I'm still waiting for a phone call. Can we stop the recording there, please?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned as well, we've only sort of briefly touched on Site Manager. So if you do want another kind of webinar setup like this in the future, I can go over Site Manager in more detail for you as well and get you a recording of that.
What I was
Of this as well, I'll just start that recording now.
Right.
No.
Perfect.
My screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. So, like yesterday, I'll do a sort of whistle stop tour of Site Manager. Feel free to jump in at any point as well if you do want me to cover anything in a bit more detail.
No problem.
So this is the Site Manager UI. It's installed somewhere on the network. It can be hidden on a virtual machine somewhere. Site Manager runs an internal web server, and the main benefit of that being that then you can access it from anywhere on the network essentially. Like yesterday, we mentioned standalone Reflect. You can think of that as imaging and backing up individual endpoints. The Site Manager still works in a similar way. Those backups are still performed on the endpoint using a Site Manager agent, which I'll go over in a bit more detail in a moment. But the main benefit of Site Manager being that you can manage, monitor those schedules from one central location. So the first step to using the Site Manager is to add endpoints to manage. So I'll remove this computer for a moment. So as you can see here, this is what you'd see when you first install Site Manager. There's no computer being added. So there's a few different ways that computers can be added. There's add domain computers, and that's using LDAP to query the domain that the Site Manager sits on. You can also specify other domains in the settings, as you'll see in a second as well. There's add network computers. So if network discoveries enabled on the computers, they can be discovered by the Site Manager that way. There's add computers manually using either the NetBIOS, DNS, or IP address. And failing any of those options, you can install the agent manually on the endpoint as well. Enter the IP information for the Site Manager, and then the agent can connect back to the Site Manager. It's then as simple as coming into the Add Computers page here, selecting this option, and you'd see computers attempting to connect with the Site Manager. And that's for security reasons, essentially. If someone does want to connect an agent to the Site Manager, it has to be confirmed by the Site Manager as well. So since I'm already running an agent on this computer, I will just accept that into the Site Manager UI. You'll notice here that it's gone straight into initializing and then connected. What we normally see is it will come up as disconnected. It's then as simple as selecting the computer and clicking Install Agent. That will then use Windows file sharing to copy the installer to the endpoint, and then that's ran on the endpoint to install the agent. You'll have noticed as well, once computer has been added to the SiteManager UI, these tags on the left have become populated. So these are the predefined tags. As you can see, we have the status, we have the architecture of the computer, whether it's a workstation or server, kind of information that a user might want to use to start filtering their computers. You can also create your own tags and group computers that way as well. So the example I like to give is by geographical location. We could have the office group, and then, if we have a London, Manchester, and Liverpool office, so I could add Liverpool here. And then we can add computers to the relevant tag. So as you'll see in a moment, this is more useful than just for filtering computers. But at its lowest level, we could come in here and click Liverpool and see all of the computers in our Liverpool office. So once we've added computers, the next step is to create a definition. And this works similar to the definition that you saw yesterday in Standalone Reflect. This is just controlling what is being backed up. So obviously, since we are managing backups for multiple computers, there is the additional step of selecting computers to image. So create a name for the definition. I'm just putting test here, but we do recommend putting something that will help distinguish this in the future. So, Manchester servers, Manchester workstations, something to that effect. We have a disk image and a file and folder backup, and also how we select those computers. So the most basic way is select computers. You'll get a list of all the computers that have been added to SiteManager, and you can use the checkbox to pick out the computers you want to include. The slightly more advanced method is to use select tags. And then we can come in here, select the tag that we want to back up. So if I did say, UEFI, any computer with UEFI firmware would then be included in this backup. For this example, I'll use Liverpool. And the great thing about using tags for the definitions as well is that they're updated dynamically. So suppose we got a new laptop in Liverpool, connected it to the network, and then added it to SiteManager. If we then put it in the Liverpool tag, it will be automatically included in the definition. We wouldn't then need to go and start editing the definitions manually. Following this, we can decide what is backed up from each computer that we've selected. And to do this, we have a set of predefined rules, and these are include and exclude rules. And the idea here is that, if we are managing backups for 50 computers, we don't want to go through and pick, this partition from this agent, this disk from this one. So these rules allow you to select a large number of disks and partitions very quickly. And using a combination of include and exclude, we can get a lot of granularity with that as well. So if I do all disks and then check matching partitions, this would show me every computer included in the definition. And if the disk and partitions are shown as green, they're included. If they're shown as red, they're not included. So as you can see here, disk 1 is my operating system disk. These are system partitions denoted by the Windows icon. And then on disk 2, we have some data partitions. So suppose I did only want to back up those data partitions. I could do include all disks, and then I could do, for example, exclude disks containing system partitions. And then if we go back in and check, that has become red since those system partitions are no longer included. For this example, I will just back up system partitions. And then if we look in here again, now it's just for system partitions and not the data ones. Then we have a few additional options here. We have compression, encryption, and configuring a password to prevent unauthorized access to the image file. We have verification, and this just ensures that once that image has been written to the destination, that the data contained in the image is the exact same as the data that's been backed up, and that's done using hashes that are created during the image. control the CPU priority on the endpoint being imaged, and enable a bandwidth rate limit as well, just to stop it, flooding the network if we are performing a lot of backups at the same time. Once we've finished, that is shown in the definitions tab, along with any other definitions that we've created. If we have a repository created, we could run that now in an ad hoc fashion. Or the much more common way of doing this is to schedule the backups as well. So you'll notice here in the schedules tab, we have the industry standard templates that you saw yesterday. So these are just commonly used across, the industry. They're tried and tested templates. However, if those don't fit the customer's environment, they can also create their own schedule too. So for this example, I'll just do a daily full backup at 9 a.m. You can then specify retention rules, so how many backups will be retained in the destination at any one time, and some additional options here as well. So we have how backups should be handled for offline computers. So the example I like to give here is, if we're backing up workstations in a school, if for whatever reason one of those computers is offline at backup time, we might not want it to trigger automatically when it's turned on in the morning, since a student might be using it. So in that case, we might just have it fail, and then it won't be retried when the computer comes back on. We can defer it until it's online, or we can try sending a wake on LAN message as well. And we can configure how failed backups are handled as well. So, occasionally transient errors do occur. Could be a temporary network error. So we can have that retry with an amount of time in between each attempt as well, in case it is a transient error and it might have been cleared when that backup's next retried. We have power saving options, so what will happen to the endpoint once the backup has completed. And we have a couple of additional options here to disable agent notifications. So once we're happy with our schedule, that will be shown in the Schedules tab here. The final step is to configure a repository. A repository is just a predefined storage area where the backups will be located. So here's one that I created earlier. However, these are different options for a repository you can create. The most common, I'd say, is a network share. So this could be just, a share anywhere on your network. Could be a NAS, could be a file server, could just be a share on a workstation if you have enough storage. AWS storage gateway, Azure storage accounts, and a local repository, which is local to each endpoint being imaged.
With regard to the repository, is there a limit as to the size of the repository can be? Because with some of the vendors, for example, we have to define the repository. So, for example, repository A could be 10 terabyte, and then we have to create another repository. Or with yourselves, is it just an unlimited value based on the disks?
That's a good question. I say there isn't a limit. I'm not aware of any customer ever reaching that limit. I can't say the number that we've tried up to, but I don't believe there's a limit now.
Okay.
And then in this as well, there is also, configure some authentication details to access the repository, and some additional options here as well. So, how many backups can go to this repository at any one time. So, if it's a powerful enough machine, I could have 20 computers backing up to it at once, and as long as the network can take that as well. And one thing to remember with the authentication details here is that the endpoints will back up directly to the repository. It won't be proxied via Site Manager. So suppose my repository is on a NAS. I'd enter, say, some local credentials for that NAS, or domain credentials that have access to the folder. At the time of the backup, all of those computers will write directly to that folder. So nothing's proxied via Site Manager. So once we've created the repository, it will be shown in the Scheduled Activity tab here. And to schedule the backup itself, we select Schedule Backup, select our definition, select our schedule, and then finish. And it's as simple as that. for the final configuration. And then you'll see here the partitions and computers that we've specified and the schedule that we created as well. So a full backup at 9 every day. We can disable it here if you want to temporarily stop the scheduled backup. We can run it now and delete that as well. And we can schedule as many backups as we want for each repository as well. The other option that you'll see under here is the remote sync. So what this does is at a predefined time that the user selects, all of the backups in the repository will be synced to another location. So in this example, I'm just using a network share and a network share for the remote sync as well. So at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, all of those backups will be copied across to the remote sync location. And the main benefit of that being, obviously, if I'm using a NAS as a destination and then it spontaneously bursts into flames, I have another location with those backups that I can use to recover.
So when it is synced, are backups tested again by validation before they're actually moved over, or does a backup only get tested and validated when a backup job's actually run?
I believe they are validated again in the remote sync destination as well.
Okay.
And you'll see here we have a few different options for remote sync. We have Windows network shares, local path again, file transfer, so that's FTP and the various flavors of FTP, and also any S3 compatible cloud storage. So if we have a look here, the ones that are shown in the UI just means we've tested with them. We know they work. So Amazon, Backblaze, and Wasabi. However, you should theoretically be able to use any S3 compatible cloud storage. The developers have said as well, if you are using an S3 storage that's not in this list, let us know, and we're happy to test it and potentially put it in the UI as well. And to go along with that as well, we have a lot of articles and videos for configuring those cloud storage sync destinations. So obviously the steps are slightly different for each provider. So in our knowledge base, we do have articles on how each one is configured. So once we've configured that, our backups are now being created. We can start restoring those backups. The first kind of one I'll show you is individual file recovery. So I believe I showed you this yesterday, but mounting a backup to pull out individual files and folders. We can do the same to site manager repositories as well. So if I go in here, you'll notice I have one full backup. Suppose someone in the accounting team has accidentally deleted an important spreadsheet and the image is 4 terabytes of data. We don't want to restore those partitions back to a point in time, restore all that data. So what we could do instead is do open image, come in here, and we can see every file and folder that's included in that backup. So suppose I decided the reflect install log was really important. I can select download, and it will be downloaded to the browser I'm using to access the site manager. So suppose I've got a site-to-site VPN configured. The site manager's in London. I'm accessing it from Manchester. If I do download here, this will be downloaded to my browser in Manchester that I'm using to access the site manager.
If there is a large file, is it possible to still download it in the browser? Because I know with another vendor, they offer the same service as what you're offering, but when it becomes a larger file, say over 5 gigabyte, they have to use a special program. Is there a limit with yourselves, or is it just a case of still selecting the file regardless of the size and then just downloading it in the browser?
I'd say it's just a case of downloading it in the browser. Again, that's a good question. I'm not aware of any customers who have downloaded files of that size. I'm not aware of any limit, though, for downloading it in the browser. We do. This is just about 5 gig. Yeah, so as you can see, it's just zipping it up and then downloading it in the browser. I'm going to cancel that, so I'm not downloading 5 gig of data. So that's a good feature for anyway, for if you do have individual files and folders you want to recover. Another thing I'll only very briefly touch on, since I did show this in more detail yesterday, Macrium Viboot can be installed as part of the Site Manager installation. So you could install this on the Site Manager server, and that can be used again to boot virtual machines of the images that you've created as well. The other options for recovery is the remote restore. So we can come in here, select the computer we want to restore, select that image, and then we can supply a message that just says, a restore's about to take place, save your work. A few additional options up here as well. And then we can start that restore. And that will push the image out and remotely restore it to the endpoint. The caveats for this being, obviously, that the computer you're restoring to does have to be online and connected to the site manager. So we can kind of think of this. The example I'd maybe give for remote restore again is in a school. If you want to reset computers at the end of the day, you could push them out from here and restore them that way. In the event that the endpoint isn't connected to a site manager, so Windows isn't booting, or it's a bare metal machine that doesn't have an operating system on it, that's where the rescue media will come in useful. So rescue media works in pretty much the exact same way on the standalone Reflect. It's a bootable environment based on either Windows PE or Windows RE, and it contains a version of Macrium Reflect. And the use for this is obviously if we don't have a version of Macrium Reflect to restore images, we can boot it up and restore the images with the rescue media. So in the case of a bare metal machine, there's no operating system to access, reflect, and restore the image. I'd attach a USB drive with my rescue media on, boot it, and then restore the image this way. And there's a few different options here. So one of the great things about Site Manager Rescue Media that is different to the Reflect Rescue Media, the Reflect Rescue Media has to be built before disaster occurs. So we always say one of the first things you should do is build your rescue media, test it, make sure it's working. You can build it on a second machine. However, it can become a bit of a hassle when it's time for recovery. The Site Manager Rescue Media is different in the way that you can create it after the machine's already failed. So when I add a computer to Site Manager, we'll start polling that machine saying, what devices have you got? Send me the drivers for them. And then if we look in the device drivers tab here, since it's a virtual machine, there won't be anything. But, if it was a physical computer, this would show, network card, RAID card, stuff to that effect. And those drivers are stored in a database on Site Manager. So then suppose demo PC died and is no longer booting, I can come in here and build rescue media for it, even though the computer is offline.
With the rescue media, is it possible? There's another vendor that does this. I was wondering if you do it as well, where we can create a bootable PE that we add, say, to either WDS or MDT, so that when the computers boot up, it's booting to the network. Is it possible to add the ISO, say, to WDS or MDT, so that it can boot to the network and then connect remotely that way? Is that possible?
Yeah, so WDS definitely. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the other option that you mentioned. However, I can't see any issues with that. We have a knowledge base article that covers this in more detail, but it's essentially a matter of selecting the ISO, using a DISM command, and we have, all this is on the knowledge base, using the DISM command to mount that and take the WIM out of it. You can then provide that WIM to WDS and network boot with it. We're also sort of in the process of writing an article that discusses how to set up your own TFTP server and integrate that with DHCP so that you can run your own PXE sort of environment. I'm not too sure how far we are on writing that blog post, but I can we can definitely give you a shout when that's done as well.
Okay.
And again, as well, we are aware of how useful PXE booting is. So this is an area we are planning on focusing on more in the future as well. Unfortunately, I can't give a time frame for that, but that is on the development roadmap.
Okay. MDT just works with WDS. It's another way that you can add programs to an ISO image, just so you know. So you can actually build the operating system and install, say, certain programs.
Yeah.
To enjoy the network. Just gives it a bit more features.
Yeah, I can't see there being any issues. I can definitely say for WDS though that is possible since we have, that's tried and tested. So in the rescue media, there's a few different options. We have the agent rescue media where we select a particular computer. It will build the relevant version of Windows PE and the necessary drivers for that computer. We have generic rescue media where we select a version of Windows PE. And that will include all the drivers for the computers that use that version of Windows PE. Or we have a universal rescue media, which includes every version of PE and all the necessary drivers for every computer. Obviously, this one will take a little bit longer to build since it's going to be including a lot more drivers and every version of PE. So for this example, I'll just do the agent rescue media, select finish, and then that will start building the ISO on the site manager console. So we'll come back to this in a second to show you what's happened once that's been created. But if we look down here, we also have the rescue USB builder. So since this is just an ISO, we do provide a tool to mount that. So I've got a network error, but we do provide a tool to mount that as well. And that will be downloaded again to the computer that we're using to access the site manager. And then this is used just to mount the site manager ISOs onto a USB to use to recover computers. So once that's finished, I'll show you downloading the ISO as well. That's just a matter of clicking here, and the ISO will also be downloaded to the computer I'm using to access the site manager. And obviously the great thing being, again, if the site manager's in London and I'm in Manchester, I could build rescue media and then download it to my computer in Manchester along with the USB builder and create that rescue media locally. So we'll come back to that once the ISO's been built. In the settings, we have a few additional options. So I won't go through these page by page, but just to click through, I'll discuss a little bit more about some of them. We touched on this yesterday, I believe, as well. We have SMTP configuration here, and also a backup summary email that'll just give us an overview of the whole site manager. We have Slack integration. The security page has a few more features on it. We can allow access to the site manager without logging in. It's not recommended, but you can do that. And network access. So if I only wanted site manager to be accessible from the local machine, I can use that option. We have user permissions, so who can access the site manager. And this is where you'd configure those additional domains. So the domain that the site manager is connected to would be included automatically. However, if it can access another domain, I can specify that here as well. Mine doesn't have a domain since it is just a local computer. It's in a local work group.
With that, then, is it possible, obviously in an AD environment, to say let the AD administrators have access, say, an AD group, so that so many administrators can have permissions, or would it be a case of doing it one by one?
No, yeah, you can also use Active Directory groups to allow access. So if we look in the permissions page here, again, since I don't have a domain, we'll be doing it for local users. But for your example, I could come in here and click administrators, and then anyone in the administrators group now can access the site manager. And we can still control the role for that as well. Administrator has access to everything, standard user nothing, and then we can provide extra roles that allow the standard user to do things. So I will, just as an example, add me. And then we have a few additional options down here as well. In the notifications page, we can control which notifications are sent on certain events. So, you know, we could do it for a backup start, success, and you can control what you want to receive the notifications for. We have some system settings here. So a display name for the site manager and a configuration transfer. So essentially, the entire site manager configuration is in the Macrium site manager folder here. So as you can see, repositories, it's an XML file that contains the repository we created before. So as you can see, that's the path I used. And there's, you know, some password information in there for the authentication details. It's encrypted to stop anyone looking at those passwords. And we have essentially everything about the site manager is contained in this folder. So what the configuration transfer does is archive how our site manager is configured. And then we can download that configuration. Network error again, but that will download the configuration to the computer I'm using to access Site Manager again. And that configuration can then be used to, say, either move Site Manager, or in the event that the Site Manager server goes down, you don't have an image of it, run the Site Manager installer. In the initial setup, it will say, here's your setup options. You click import, and you can import that zip file. Your Site Manager's back up and running.
So if hypothetically say that a server went down that Site Manager was installed on, and say that Site Manager had 10 server licenses that were currently being used, if that server had to be re-imaged because we couldn't access Site Manager, does that mean that the client will lose access to them 10 licenses, or how would they regain access to the licenses as well as Site Manager?
That's a good question. In terms of the licensing, since they weren't removed from the site manager, I believe they'll be counted as still in use. However, what you can do is, if you contact our support team, we can manually reset the installation for those licenses without any issues.
What type of turnaround do you have done with that type of issue, for example?
With license resets especially, it's extremely quick. So I'd say, you know, within maybe an hour or two.
Okay.
Yeah, the type of turnaround for issues does obviously depend on the complexity of it. The license reset is a couple of button clicks in our admin panel, so it's extremely quick.
Okay.
We have the multi-site here. Multi-site, essentially you can connect multiple site managers to it and manage, not necessarily manage, but you can view those site managers from one console. So, you know, if I have site managers installed in a lot of geographical different locations, I can enable this. It will start pinging our endpoints. We host multi-site in Azure. This will start pinging our endpoints with information. When that API key is being added to multi-site, it will form a connection. A reverse SSH tunnel is then established from multi-site to site manager, and any communication between site manager and multi-site is done over that encrypted SSH tunnel.
So with that feature in multi-site, and say for example that we did add another site, like we were saying before about say London and Manchester offices.
Yeah.
Would that hypothetically say that once it's added, we will have access to say that site's groups, or would it be a case of us like saying then connecting into it, say via SSH or PuTTY, for example?
So you'd have access to the actual site manager UI. It's done using HTTPS traffic over the SSH tunnel. Unfortunately, I think my multi-site at the moment might be under maintenance, but I can very briefly show you what that would look like. So see, I've been messing around with the two-factor authentication.
You've answered one of my questions. I was going to say, do you have include that in?
Yeah, so that's it's email two-factor authentication. So the email that I'm using to access the site manager, if two-factor authentication is enabled, will receive a short code to enter.
Would you offer text messages at some point as well?
I'm afraid I don't have any information on that. I can ask the dev team after this call, and I can pass that on to Sabrina. I'm not aware of any plans, but I'd have to double check that for you.
Yeah, I know a lot of vendors that we work with currently, they only offer text message, you see, and that's what a lot of our customers are used to.
Yeah,
but I doubt it'll be an issue just going from text message to email.
yeah,
But
definitely.
I do think that would be a good feature.
Yeah, definitely. I'll raise that with the dev team. So multi-site itself is obviously more for yourself than it would be for the customers. The kind of
Yes.
example we give is like MSPs. If you have multiple customers, say 5 customers, you can add their site managers in here, and then any issues they have. Since the site manager's offline, I can't show this as well as normal, but you can expand it and click remote view, and you will have just a view of their site manager like this. So you'll have essentially access to their site manager. So if say one of these customers was having an issue, backup failing, instead of having to go back and forth to troubleshoot the issue, you could come into your multi-site console, remote view, and have a look in here for whatever the issue is. So final sort of options, we can migrate the agents to a new site manager. We can specify different server connection details and a few additional options for agent installation as well. Configuring a proxy, where the rescue media working folder is. So by default, it's in that program data folder you saw before, but I could move this somewhere else as well. And we can export drivers for particular agents from here as well. And here's the daily output. Daily, I believe this is a daily report export. Yeah, and I believe that is a CSV file that contains just information about the site manager. So I believe that's most of the features of Site Manager. One feature I kind of briefly glossed over is Macrium Macrium Image Guardian is also included with Site Manager now. So if that repository is local to the Site Manager, it will be protected by Image Guardian.
Has that ISO finished building that we looked at before?
Yes, it's just finished. So as you can see here, we get a little bit of information about the ISO. I'm assuming I'm probably going to get a network error as well. I'm going to blame that on the janky nested virtual environment. But you click download and that ISO would be downloaded here. As well as that, with Site Manager, when you're managing endpoints, the Site Manager agent is installed. And this functions very similarly to the standalone Reflect. So if I wanted, I could schedule backups in here as well. I'd recommend, where possible, doing it with the central management UI because it just makes things easier to manage. But in here as well, you can also create rescue media as necessary. Do you have any questions about any of it?
Yeah. That's perfect. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. So I know we touched upon this yesterday, but how are updates actually managed? So when we were saying about deferring the updates, how
Yes.
often would you usually update the product?
It's difficult to say. The kind of roadmap for updates is, as we're developing new features or if things are fixed, the updates kind of as and when needed. You can see here that, say, we've got between these, there's a fairly regularly updated. Um, the updates aren't automatically performed for any of our software, they have to be manually initiated. So the main advantage of that being, obviously, if you did want to stay a few versions behind, you can do that. And again, with Macrium Site Manager, we're on version 8.0.6949. However, I believe there wouldn't be any issues providing the older builds like this one here, for example. We could provide an installer for that.
What happens when you download a trial? I know on the website it says that you do get 30 days and a couple of licenses for free.
Yeah.
So once you've actually installed it and you've had the 30 days, what happens is, what does happen? Does the program stop working and then it expects you to add your own licenses, or what would happen?
Yeah, so the site manager will continue to function completely as normal. Site manager itself is free. You never have to pay for the site manager console. What would happen is, if I actually just deleted an expired key not long ago, but you come in here and you can see where it says valid expiry, because this is a trial license. Once it reaches that expiry date, the license will just no longer work. You can come in here and delete it from the site manager, and you'll need to add more license keys in order to install agents, manage the backups on the agents. However, the site manager itself won't stop working. You'll still be able to use this as normal.
How often does Site Manager refresh? So say, for example, you've added a computer or computers have been added. How often does it refresh? Because with some other vendors, when computers are, say, automatically detected and able to deploy, it could be maybe an hour before the system actually refreshes.
That's a good question. I don't have the exact amount of time. It's definitely less than an hour. I'm pretty sure it's instant when license keys are added. It prompts a kind of check. So 1 second, if I delete this license key, for example, you can see that computer's now gone straight into unlicensed. So that's no longer being backed up. If I come in here and get a license key. Do So here I've added just a 5-day license key. If I go into the license settings, licenses, so as you can see, it's expired. I can come in, add license, and then that's straight back to licensed. And then, as you'll see, this one expires on the 23rd. So once the 23rd is reached, that will go into the expired state, and the computers will show up as unlicensed.
Okay, final question. And if a backup has been running on a machine or a server and it gets turned off, does that backup go into a failed state, or will the backup continue where it left off once the machine is powered up again?
It will go into a failed state. The main sort of reasoning behind it is that suppose that backup fails to a network location, for that to pick up again where it left off, we'd need to re-verify everything that's already on the endpoint. We'd need to verify what's being read from the endpoint, onto the destination. And at that point, attempting to pick up after network errors, the machine being turned off, it becomes a bit of diminishing returns. And it's often just quicker to restart that backup. So if it's turned off, essentially, the backup will fail. And then if the site manager doesn't hear back from the agent within X amount of time, it times out and it'll just go, oh, that backup's failed since I've not heard anything from the agent.
Okay. I just want to say thank you again for that demo. The features and the simplicity of the product is fantastic. I love the fact that you can control not only the network, but also the CPU side of it as well. Because I know
Yeah,
with other
definitely.
vendors that isn't an option. And with the vendors that we currently work with, they do use about 80 to 85% of the CPU.
Yeah.
So I know that is going to be a humongous feature with the majority of customers that are used to give them a bit more freedom to focus on other tasks while she can set, like we discussed yesterday, the priority of the backup, how much network he wants to use, as well as CPU or GPU. So I think them features alone just sit very nicely working in the background while, say, someone at school could be working or a student could be
Yeah.
doing work, for example.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you. I'll pass that on to the development team as well.
What
Just in terms of the two-factor authentication, I did just have a word with the support team, and they did say they don't seem to have plans for it via mobile at the moment. So yeah, unfortunately not. Sorry about that.
okay. Well, I'm going to say if we start the recording there, and then that to me is the demo done again.
Perfect. I'll put that in the same OneDrive folder.